What is going on, gunfighters? Gonna try something new. Gonna try recording in the truck, mobile, on the computer, not on the phone. Hopefully it's a little bit better audio quality. Don't worry, I am not driving. The wife is driving. We have made it across what I call the Iron Curtain, that dividing line, California, Oregon, Washington, which have all become pretty restrictive in their gun laws, pretty infringy smelling. But we're across that line now, and we're in Idaho, and it is gorgeous, beautiful, quaky aspens changing color, not raining. It is just gorgeous. Anyway, today's going to be a cartridge talk episode, and it's kind of juxtaposed. The last one that I did was the 4.6x30, and this perhaps is not the most opposite round you can get. That might be like a cannonball or something like that, but it's very much, as far as modern use small arm shoulder fired weapons, it's pretty on the opposite end of the spectrum. Today we're talking about the 375 the 375 Remington Ultra Magnum, and it's rare that I come across a shoulder fired cartridge like this that I didn't know existed, that's still being produced. But I did. That happened to me in Alaska. I was at a store that sold ammunition and guns and hunting stuff, and I saw a giant stack of 375 rum. And I thought, wow, I didn't even know that was a thing. Maybe you don't know it's a thing, but now you do. 375 rum is a thing. So let's talk about it. Now, the rum is a kind of a family of cartridges, if I can use that term. And right around the millennium, right around the time people were freaking out about Y2K, somewhere around that time, Britney Spears and the Spice Girls were running around half naked. But also, more importantly for today's discussion, the cartridge world was going through like a short and fat craze for cartridges. You might remember such hits as the 300 WISM, the 7 WISM, which stands for Winchester Short Mag. There's also the super short mags. If short mags aren't short enough for you, there was the 223 WSSM, one of my favorite oddball cartridges. But anyway, right around the same time, not to be left behind, Remington came out with some cartridges. The most popular of these is going to be the 300 Remington Ultra Magnum. But also, for today's discussion, the 375 Remington Ultra Magnum. And as brief research showed, the 375 is in fact just a necked up 300 Remington Ultra Magnum. Which, if you don't know, necking up, necking down, that's basically taking a parent cartridge. A real famous one is the 30-06. And you can probably deduce without me explaining it where the neck is on that cartridge. You make it smaller, put a 277 diameter bullet on it, and bam, you have a 270, a neck down 30-06. You can neck it up to 35 caliber, and you have the 35 Wayland. Well, they did the same thing here with the 300 rum to the 375 rum, giving you a 375 diameter projectile. And as soon as I say 375, many of you will be reminded of the most famous 375 of all, and that's going to be the 375 H&H. Legendary. I do believe the first belted Magnum. A little history for you. Magnum, as I understand the history and lore, before, and it predates the cartridge world, Magnum was what you would call a big champagne bottle. You had your standard champagne bottles, and you had your Magnums, big champagne bottles. And you can kind of see why a big cartridge would kind of be called a Magnum, because it kind of looks like a big champagne bottle. But that's pretty interesting. But the 375, perhaps the first modern Magnum cartridge, the 375 H&H. And for a while, it was pretty much the 375. There are some others, but for today's discussion, the 375 Remington Ultra Magnum. With the 375 H&H, that's likely taken everything on the planet you might say, why? Why the 375 rum? Well, the 375 H&H has some pretty strong following around the world. It also has some detractors. A lot of people say the belted Magnum part is unnecessary, and I would say it's probably unnecessary for today. It served a purpose at the time, back when head spacing and rifles were made a little bit different. But for today, I could say, yeah, the belted part of the Magnum is a little bit superfluous, not really needed. Also, that whole craze of the shorter, beefier cartridges. If you don't know, in general, a shorter powder column will burn more efficiently than a long, skinny powder column. So in general, you get more efficient use of the same amount of powder in a shorter, fatter powder column. And if you look at a 375, it in fact has a very long, skinny powder column. And you know, that had its time and place. There was a reason for that at the time, when you're talking about smooth feeding and long, thin cartridges and magazines and for double rifles and things like that. But I could see why you might want a more modern 375. With that said, really the big standard of comparison is going to be the 375 H&H. So let's look at this legendary cartridge. Now, if we talk about the 300 grain, which I'm going to pick because it's easily compared between the two, and I should give credit where it's due. I'm talking numbers from Wikipedia because I'm doing this mobily, and it's just easier. So it lists a couple of 300 grain loads. We look at a 300 grain Norma at $25.59. And again, that's a legendary, historic, dangerous, and African game cartridge. And if we look at the 300 grain and the 300 rum, we're talking about 300 grains at $29.45. That's quite a large bump up in velocity. And we have to remember, if we believe physics the way they're presented to us, that energy equals mass times velocity squared. If we look at energy foot-pounds for the older 375 H&H, you're talking 4,363. And if we talk about the 375 rum, we're talking 5,760 foot-pounds. That is not a marginal difference. That is not just a rounding error. That is quite a big step up in power. Now, the obvious question is if the 375 H&H will kill anything on the planet, and I surmise it probably has, as far as like animals that you hunt. I don't know that anybody's ever shot a blue whale with it, but as far as animals that you hunt, African plains game, dangerous game, lions, elephants, likely all have been taken many times over with the 375 H&H. So why, pray tell, would you want even more power than that? Well, some people just like more power, right? Some people like to overhaul engines for power. Some people hunt deer with the 300 Winchester Magnum. I mean, you can make the argument that, and I would, that 243 will kill any deer well if you do your job well. I would have to go back and count the notches in the stock of my 243 to give you an accurate number of how many deer and elk I've killed with that gun. But some people like to hunt, you know, even whitetail deer with a 300 Win Mag, and I'm not going to tell them that they're wrong. Some people just want power. If you want more power and you want the 375, well, the 375 Remington Ultra Magnum. It's in the name, it's Ultra Magnum. If Magnum is not Magnum enough, you put a little Ultra on it. It's like the OxyClean of Magnums. You just pump it up a notch. So if that's what you're looking for, you might look at the 375 rum. Another reason you might want this cartridge is you see a good deal on one, since it's not nearly as popular, and I don't know that there's anybody currently chambering rifles in it. You might get a really good deal at a gun show or on the used gun rack. And when you start talking about any kind of cartridge that's outside the normal parameters of common cartridges, 30-06, 308, 243, I really start thinking about hand loading. It just makes so much sense. And if you're going to hand load, you could load this to the pressures of a 375 H&H, or even down, or you could load it up as hot as you want. So again, if you get a good deal on the rifle and you get a good deal on some used brass, why not? It would be a good thing for that. Once you have your own brass, it really doesn't matter. And it's not like you can't get factory loads for it. I believe, well, I obviously saw some in the store. That's how I learned about the cartridge itself. So there are cartridges available for the 375 rum. And again, you might just get a good deal on it because it's not in vogue right now. It's not the new hot cartridge, but it's still a good cartridge. And if 375 will kill any game animal on the planet, 375 H&H to 375 rum will certainly do it. If you like this cartridge, you may also want to research the 375 H&H, did an episode on that. And you may also want to check out the 375 Ruger. It is not the same as the Ultra Magnum. It is basically the 375 Ruger, basically designed to duplicate the 375 H&H, but in a standard length, what I would call a standard length, a 30-06 length action. So much more easy to chamber existing rifles in that. So that's a 375 Ruger. They're also even more obscure than I think the 375 rum is a 376 Steyr, designed for like a Dragoon version, a big, beefy, dangerous game version of the Steyr Scout rifle. I don't know if they ever chambered in any other rifles, but if you like this cartridge and it's intriguing, you may research those as well. Those are kind of tangential in the search for a good 375. And if you like the history, you want to hunt with a safari jacket and a Jones hat, and not that you have to do that, but if you like the history of the cartridge, you want to recreate, a great African hunt or a great Alaskan hunt, there is nothing wrong with that old but still good 375 H&H. And that's really what this cartridge is designed for, unless you just like shooting big magnums. It's designed for big and dangerous game, right? Things like elephant, things like, depending on if that's legal to hunt where you're going to Africa to hunt, but Cape buffalo or American bison would be a good candidate. Brown bear, grizzly bear, things like that. That's kind of what these cartridges are designed for. Anyway, your tactical tip of the day doesn't just apply to big magnums, but especially to big magnums. These are, unless you're talking about some kind of tactical sniper 300 Win Mag rifle, you're generally talking about a hunting rifle. And I would encourage you to get off the bench after your rifle is zeroed. There's nothing with zeroing a rifle on a bench, especially a Magnum, and putting it in a lead sled. But I would encourage you to practice shooting, especially a Magnum, from the standing, from the kneeling, from off your pack, things like that, actual field positions. Especially from the standing, because, I was a professional hunter and guide, and it's a sad thing to see a hunter who misses an opportunity they legit had, but they didn't take it because they've only ever shot off a bench. And they're waiting for that animal to be still long enough to get a really good shooting position. Animals, oftentimes aren't going to do that. You'll, I think, really increase the amount of game that you get if you're comfortable shooting offhand. By offhand, I mean standing unsupported. And you'll generally find, or at least I generally find, that pain is less shooting those big magnums from standing or kneeling than from the prone or from a bench. So really give that some thought, especially this time of year. If your hunting season is not coming past, if you're getting ready for it, consider shooting from those common field positions. That's your tactical tip of the day, your tactical verse of the day. Very fitting for today's episode, Proverbs 12. The lazy do not roast any game, but the diligent feed on the riches of the hunt. Not just in hunting, but in life, in marriage, in work. Men, let's remember to be diligent. And I pray that God blesses us all this year in good hunting. With that, thanks for listening, and have a blessed day.